Hello.
Hello, I think this is all working.
I think it's working. I don't know whether we're waiting for someone to tell us to start or whether I think we just start.
I think we just go.
I think we already have started, in fact. Welcome, everybody, to this event. It's really exciting to be here. My name's Sophie Hannah, and I am delighted to be here with Tana French, best-selling, critically acclaimed superstar writer, whose latest novel, The Hunter, was published in the US yesterday. So, Tana, thank you for coming to chat to us about the novel. We've got lots of questions that people who are at the event have sent in, and I will ask you those in due course. I've also got loads of questions to ask you myself. But before we do any of that, just tell us a little bit about the book. I'm sure loads of people have started to read it already. But for anyone who hasn't yet got their copy or read the jacket copy on the cover, tell us what the book is about.
Well, it's kind of a linked novel to my last one, The Searcher, but where The Searcher was about one guy, Cal Hooper, an American detective who's taken early retirement and come to the west of Ireland looking for peace and quiet, which he obviously does not find. This one is about Cal, his girlfriend Lena, a local woman, and this kind of half-feral teenager, Trey Reddy, who they're raising from a wild kid into a good kid going good places. Only what happens is, while they're building their little pseudo-family, and just before things have a chance to solidify, Trey's dad, who's been off somewhere gallivanting for the last 2 years, decides to come home. And he's brought with him an English millionaire and a plan to find gold in the townland, and he wants Trey on board to help out his plan. And Cal and Lena are ready to do anything that's needed in order to protect Trey, but Trey doesn't want protecting. She wants revenge. And from there, it all goes a little bit funny.
So I feel, and tell me if you disagree, but to me, this novel feels even more along the way towards being kind of a full-on Western, like even more than the last one was. Would you agree with that? I mean, I was reading it thinking this is a Western, which I was quite excited because I don't normally read Westerns, but I love your book so much. I read whatever you write, and I was like, I think I might be reading a Western. What's going on?
It kind of is. I mean, I think both of them are, I'm calling it mystery software running on Western hardware, because where the idea for The Searcher first came from was that I'd been, for the first time in my life, reading Westerns. I hadn't come across them until a few years ago either. And I was thinking about how well some of the Western tropes would fit onto the west of Ireland, how much those settings have in common, and how much Irish literature touching on the west of Ireland has that Western feel of a place that is far removed, both geographically and culturally, from the centres of power, to the point where the people living there feel like, okay, the power brokers don't understand our lives, they don't care. And if we want a society that's cohesive and functioning, we're going to have to make our own rules and enforce them ourselves. So that's what I was thinking about with both books, is how the tropes from one would map onto the other. But I think with this one, because I don't drop in a dead body until what, two-thirds of the way through the book, up until then the focus is not on the mystery side. It is more on that Western trope of, the gold rush and the revenge and the adventurer who returns from far away bringing trouble in his wake. All of those are very Western tropes, and they take up the bulk of the first two-thirds of the book. So I'd say, yeah, it probably does feel more like a Western, but that was kind of accidental. It wasn't deliberate.
And even having a main character with a strong desire for revenge, not that it couldn't happen in a crime novel, but that's very Western-like as well, isn't it? That sort of need for revenge.
Oh, yeah, especially because Westerns tend to be books that get deeply involved in morality. There's a lot in there about good and bad, not necessarily with a message behind it, but just the sense that good and bad are a core part of life, and good people can do bad people can do good things. And what do you do if you find yourself in a situation where you'd like to do something good, but there is no good action available to you? There are only ones that could have different amounts of damage available. And in a lot of Westerns, the revenge theme is the one that takes a character there, where they feel that they have to, they're morally obligated to have some kind of revenge. And yet that comes with its own moral pitfalls and isn't possible from a strictly moral standpoint. So yeah, that revenge theme, a lot of Western characters are looking for revenge one way or another and end up either not getting it or choosing not to get it or getting it and then finding out that it never turns out the way they plan.
Mm-hmm. So are you, and like before you wrote this book, before you wrote The Searcher, were you a fan of Westerns, either to like movies or books, or were you kind of surprised when you found yourself sort of getting close to those kind of things?
Totally surprised. I had never really. I'd seen one or two westerns, like I was blown away by Unforgiven, but I hadn't really got into the genre. It just didn't catch me. And then Pat Anderson from the Washington Post years ago recommended. He was like, "Oh, you have to read Lonesome Dove," and I trust his taste. This is someone who's crazy about books and whose taste I trust. So I got Lonesome Dove and had a read. And man, what a book. It absolutely blew me away. So I started trying other Westerns and fell in love with True Grit and fell in love with, like, on the more modern end, the Sisters Brothers. And I did find some, the more sort of, I guess, standards sticking more closely to the conventions Westerns that didn't catch my imagination, that just
Yeah.
I didn't like as much. But the ones I thought that stretched the boundaries, played with them, tried to fit more into the Western genre than just a story. And every genre has these. You have the ones that stick closely to the conventions, and you have the ones that use them as a starting point to play with. And in mystery, I love both. But in Western, it turns out I love the ones that play with the conventions more. But it came out of nowhere. I didn't expect to be into Westerns at any point.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think you might actually have created my favorite Western. I think because so my dad was very into Westerns, and so we watched quite a few because he said, "Oh, you must watch this and you must watch that." And the thing that always annoyed me about sort of traditional Westerns, especially movies, is that a stranger would ride into town seeking revenge, but he would never chat to anyone on the way to getting his revenge. There would never be a scene where he would like stop in a cafe and say, "Hey, let me tell you all about why I'm cross and why I'm." He'd just like silently and smolderingly go and like try and kill someone. And I'd be like, if he would only chat to someone, then I'd know why he's so upset. But your dialogue, I mean, dialogue has always been a really, really sort of big treat in your books because your character, your dialogue is so brilliant and the conversations are so rich and textured and proper. That you've kind of brought that into the Western genre, and the genre really needed it. So, was that something you were aware of at all?
Listen, if you're writing a book in Ireland, set in Ireland, there's no way you can avoid people having the chats. This is just the national occupation, and good banter is the national currency. So you cannot have a stranger ride into town looking for a gold revenge, whatever it is, without him having a few good chats along the way. And probably some bit of creative profanity and creative insults and, all the good Irish stuff. That's what Ireland's got to bring to the Western if we want them.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, my dad sadly died in 2013, but if he was still alive, I would say to him, you must read Tana French's new book because she gets that Westerns need more chatting in them.
So Westerns with chit chat. Westerns with chit chat.
Yeah, definitely. Before you wrote this book and the last book, your novels were kind of more squarely in the sort of crime suspense genre, not Westerns at all. Did you have any, I don't know what that was there anything kind of psychologically or emotionally difficult for you about feeling as though you were slightly changing genre? Or like, did you think, what will readers think? Or did you kind of have a bit of an identity crisis where you're like, oh, but I'm not this writer anymore? Or was it just like, I'm a writer and I want to write loads of different things?
Well, I've got to admit, when I started writing my first book, In the Woods, I didn't think I was writing a mystery novel. I just thought I was writing a book which had a mystery structure to it because structure is my weak point. I'm not good at structure. I'm comfortable writing character, writing dialogue, writing like a good sentence, atmosphere. But when it comes to structure, that's big and scary. I don't know how to structure something. And mystery, the gorgeous thing about mystery is that it comes with its framework built in. A kills B and C finds out who done it. Obviously, there are loads of variations and loads of people who don't stick to that, but you can have that structure. So I thought, excellent, I can have this structure because without it, this book will be 1,000,000 words long. It'll be 10 years down the line, and I'll still be happily writing, just having a blast with my characters here, and nothing will ever get handed in. So the mystery framework shows you where to start and where to finish, which is pretty useful for somebody who's not good with structure. So I just thought I was writing a book and using the mystery framework to get the damn thing finished someday. So it wasn't really a big leap to go, all right, I'll play with it this way, I'll play with it that way, I'll try throwing in some Western, and why not? It didn't feel like a big change because I'd already come to the mystery genre and its conventions as something that is more a starting point than a set of boundaries. It's more something that, you take that and build it in, but then you see how you can play with it. And this was just another way to play with it.
So one of the questions that somebody else has sent in is, do you see yourself, well, two questions from two different people. Question one, do you see yourself writing more Cal Hooper stories? And the second question, do you think you'll ever return to the Dublin Murder Squad series?
Oh, okay. The Cal Hooper thing, right? Searcher was meant to be a standalone. I was not coming back to these characters. But the thing was, both that mix of genres I liked, but also that townland, that place. Somewhere like that, it is just a hotbed of secrets and intertwined relationships and stories that can go places. And I had a hard time leaving that behind after only one book, which I think is one of the reasons why I came back to it. And as it turns out, this appears to be, touch wood, a trilogy. Because I realized after this one that there's a kind of arc going on where the first book is about an outsider and the hunter is about three people who operate kind of on the periphery between insider and outsider. Cal, because he lives here now, but he's not Irish, he's not from around here. Lena, because she has deliberately made herself into an outsider as much as possible, because she doesn't want this townland all up in her business. And Trey, because while she is from Ardnakelty, she's from that family that every small town has that, they really don't want to deal with and don't think are worth dealing with. So this one was about people on the periphery. And I felt like that arc needs closing with a book about what it's like or what it means to be an insider within this townland. So this looks like being 3 linked books rather than 2, which I really didn't expect. And on the Dublin Murder Squad thing, I never say never. That was a lot of fun to write. And I definitely would go back to it at some stage if I had an idea for it. The thing was, I felt like I was getting too comfortable almost with writing from the detective's perspective, writing police procedurals. I felt like I was starting to know how to do this. And it's going to sound weird, but as a writer, I'm only happy when I'm operating a little outside of my comfort zone, when I feel like I've bitten off a bit more than I can chew. And I also felt like the perspective of a detective, it is the classic for crime fiction, but I wasn't comfortable sticking with it too much longer because there's so many other perspectives within a murder investigation. There are, witnesses, suspects, victims, perpetrators. And I felt like all of these perspectives deserved space and a voice and needed some space and a voice. So I wanted to branch out and try things from those different perspectives as well. But yeah, never say never. I might go back to the Murder Squad.
And do you know yet what the third in the Cal trilogy might? Are you sort of having ideas for that already, or have you started writing it already?
I've started writing it, but it's still in that messy stage where I don't actually know what happens beyond the bit I've written. Like I don't have it planned ahead or anything. At this stage, no idea what's going on, so I'm just feeling my way, hoping there's a book in there.
That leads neatly to 3 questions that have been sent in. And they're kind of all different variations on the same thing. So it's basically about process. How do you brainstorm ideas for books, could you describe the process? And then linked to that is like, how do you come up with your plots? What's the way, like, does it take time to format the character and storyline before you start writing?
No, I don't have a plan. I never have a plan. I jump into a book with, usually I've got a really clear sense of the main character, I've got a really clear sense of the key setting, and I've got a basic premise. Like with The Hunter, it was, what if Trey's absent father came back bringing a there's gold and then there hills scheme along with him? What would that do to the interplay of relationships between the three main characters? But that's all I've got. I can't really plot ahead because I need to write the characters for a while, get to know them, what they would do in this situation before I can figure out who would do what and why. So normally when I go into a book, I have no idea who done it. If there is, a murder in the first bit, which this one there wasn't even, so I didn't even know who was going to get killed, if anybody, until I was about halfway through. So no, I don't know who done it. I don't know how the story's going to pan out. I just have to figure it out as I go, which it makes for a lot of rewriting. Because if you realize in chapter, 10 or whatever, oh my God, this person absolutely feels this way about this one, or this person did the murder, you're going to have to go back and seed that properly, make sure it's properly rooted in the earlier chapter. So it makes for a lot of rewriting, but it's kind of the only way I know how to do that. And so it was the first one. Where do you get inspiration from?
No, it was what's the process? Hold on.
Brainstorming. Yeah.
Yeah, how do you, I mean, it's interesting. So if you start with a character and a premise, but you don't know where the plot's going to go. This is probably a silly question. I'm only asking it because my way of writing a book is kind of the opposite. I plan detail, but if you've got a character and a premise, but you don't know what the plot is, how do you know what to write in chapter one? Because if you don't know what's coming in future chapters, presumably it's harder to know what ought to happen in chapter one. Like, do you always, for example, introduce the premise in chapter one, or do you sometimes have chapter one being, the character pre-premise, as it were?
A little bit of both, but if you know kind of what the main that main premise is going to be, you can either throw the characters in there, or you can think about, oh, okay, how did they get to that day? Let's do a little bit of setting them up so that they can get there. Or you can just write them doing that. And then once you've done that, you can see how they would respond to it because you've been writing them actually doing it. And then you can see if anybody else might have responses to who would they talk to? Would they need to do something about it? And just sort of take it from there. The brainstorming process involves an awful lot of looking like I'm doing absolutely nothing, because I just go for really long walks with music on the iPod and just space out and bounce ideas and characters and paragraphs around my head. So it doesn't look anything like getting work done, but honestly, it really, really is. It gets a lot done. It's funny. I mean, I know you know this as well. Your subconscious does a lot of the work when you're writing. And for me, a lot of it is clearing other stuff out of the way so that it can get the job done in it.
Yeah, and so it's crucial, isn't it, to have space where your brain doesn't need to be on anything else. So if you're walking from A to B and you can't be doing anything else, talking to anyone, then you've got that time when your mind can just kind of go into open, almost dreamlike mode.
Yeah, exactly. You're kind of using up all the active channels on your brain by going somewhere and by having the music in your ears. And so the other channels get a chance to operate in peace.
Yeah. So a really interesting question has just landed in the chat. And I know it's interesting to me because I know you have done a lot of acting, and you've been and still are sometimes an actor. Would you ever consider writing a play? Have you ever considered writing a play?
No, it's funny because, you would think it would make sense that from acting and writing, it would add up into script writing. But no, I never have. I think it's because the big difference is when you're doing a play, when you're in a play, you only have to see this from one character's perspective. The whole story exists through the perspective of your character. And your only job is to get out of the way as the actor and let the character have as much space as possible. Your job is to just not be there. Whereas when you're writing a book, you're trying to keep all the characters' perspectives in play at once. You have to remember who's got what agenda, who's got what relationship with everybody. But you have that bit more room because you're writing like the little things like who moves closer to whom and who doesn't, and who says what at what volume. You've got a little more room to conduct it almost than a playwright would. If you're a playwright, it's the dialogue and the stage directions alone that you've got, and then you have to hand it over to the actors to flesh it out. And it's an odd balance. And I don't know how to do that, to give enough to the actors that they can peel back the layers and find who the character is in there and what the play is within the script without overdoing it and spelling it out. Because when you write a book, everything is on the page. Everything the reader needs to know has to be on that page. Whereas your job as a scriptwriter is to not do the whole job because the actors need to create the play with you. Yeah, it's a different balance, one that I haven't tried.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. What about, somebody's asked about the supernatural and speculative elements. How do you decide, she wants to know, how do you decide whether you're going to bring a supernatural or speculative element into a particular novel? Or is it just, it depends on the individual story? And do you have like thoughts about, do you have a policy with regard
My supernatural states. Yeah, it's a good question because actually some of my books do have this slight kind of weird semi-supernatural tinge, and some are very down to earth. Answer is it depends on the character. For me, and it's probably because of the acting background, basically everything stems from the character. So in some of the books, like in The Woods, Rob Ryan and In the Woods, for example, and Toby and Wych Elm, their sense of reality is kind of a fractured thing. It's not very secure. Reality feels quite slippery and permeable to them. So in those books, there are tinges of what could well be supernatural or might not. But for other main characters or narrators, like, Frank in Faithful Place, for example, or Cal, these are people who have a very solid sense of reality. Their concept of reality it's not malleable. It's not constantly shifting. It is something that is what it is. And so an element of the supernatural in those books would be completely out of place because the book exists through the characters. So I can't go throwing in supernatural into a book from the perspective of a character who doesn't see the world in those terms. The character dictates that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you have, and before you answer this, I'm going to tell you, I'm so interested in your answer to this and other writers' answers to this, because I think my answer to it is a weird one, and yours is probably more normal. But do you have a favourite among the novels you've published? And if so, is that the same as the one you think is the best? Because someone might have a favourite that they don't actually think is their best novel, but they love it for a personal reason. And I am asked this question all the time, and I don't. But what I do have is a kind of Premier League and a less Premier League. Sorry, that is an English footballing term, in case anyone doesn't know what I'm on about. So I have a category of my novels which are definitely contenders for the favourite, maybe, if I had one favourite. And then I have a lower tier of like, these ones definitely aren't my favourites. I still like them, but they're not. So are you the same, or do you have like a particular favourite? And is it the one you think is your best as well?
That actually probably describes it very well, that there are some that are definitely closer to my heart than others. In a weird way, I think In the Woods always has a special place, even though I'm 100% positive it is not my best, because it was my first novel and I had no idea what I was doing. So yeah, it's not the best, but I love it because practically nobody knew I was writing this. I told very few people because, I was going, this could turn out to be one of these things where it winds up being a pile of paper under my bed. It might not work out. It might just be something that I'm doing for myself. And also, that makes it a different experience. Once you've had your first book published, then there are readers who you can't disappoint. There are publishers who are planning things around this deadline. It matters. What you do is no longer just about you and the book. But In the Woods, I was a very broke actor turning down acting work, which actors never do, because I really wanted to get this book finished. So there was a lot riding on this. Like, if you get an actor turning down acting work for something, it means the stakes are high here. So there was a lot riding on this, and it was basically just me and this book in this teeny little granny flat. And there's something special about that. And it'll never be quite the same thing again, obviously, because once a book's been published, the relationship changes because you've got other people to factor in. But this was just me in the book. But no, I don't think it's the best. And there are definitely some that I'm closer to than others. And I found that probably the ones that are least close to my heart might be the ones I wrote when I had newborns, because so much of your brain is occupied by doing all the newborn stuff and wishing you were asleep, that there isn't really the same level of connection there, I think, available to the books.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. So somebody has asked, will you ever or would you consider writing a sequel to In the Woods?
I have actually thought about that because I think the character is interesting. And I think I would kind of like to see where he is now or later. But the thing is, when I started writing, especially when I was thinking about a second book, I was thinking about the traditional mystery series technique where you follow the one character, like P.D. James's Dalgleish, or like your Charlie and Simon. You follow the main character for a long time through the ups and downs of their lives. And the thing is, I love reading those series, but I didn't want to write one. I like writing about a moment which is a turning point for the narrator, where you know and they know that however they deal with this conflict, whatever it might be, their lives will never be the same place. Their lives will be defined by this moment. And I think there's a limit to how many of those moments you can throw at the same character, which is why I'm not sure there's a way to have a sequel to In the Woods, because that was, to a large extent, the moment where Rob Ryan came face to face with the possibility of facing up to whatever it is hidden inside his mind and made his decision about that. So I don't know if rerunning that huge decision would really work. But I've never quite ruled it out because I like those characters. I'd like to see where they've gone.
Yeah.
And sorry, that's also a reason why I didn't exactly write a sequel to The Searcher when I was doing The Hunter, because The Searcher is about Cal. It's about this one guy who's an outsider in the town and how he decides to deal with it and its demands, while the Hunter is about three people and the relationship between them, which is why it's from three perspectives, because the crucial points of the book happen between the three of them, not in one person's mind. Because again, the idea of a straight sequel is just a strange one to me.
Yeah, yeah. At what point do your agent and editor become involved? So you've got your character and your premise, and then you start writing, and it takes as long as it takes. Does your agent, for example, know in advance? Like, do you say to your agent, right, here's my idea, it's this character, they're going to come looking for revenge, they're going to want to find some gold, and that's the premise, and your agent kind of signs off on it? Or do you just write the book and only send it to your agent once it's done and they don't know what to expect until they read it?
I mostly tell them the basics, like what I said about, I think about this one was, I seem to be writing a second one set in the same village, only this time it's Cal and Lena and Treg. And for a while, that's all they really seem to need. And then later, occasionally for foreign rights in particular, I'll get a note from the agency going, could you maybe be a little bit more specific or elaborate a little more on that thing? But I think they know that I'm figuring it out as I go, and I don't have a full plot synopsis, which you do, don't you? You have a synopsis or an outline anyway before you dive in.
I do, but I don't share. So what I do is for each book, I give my publisher the sort of blurb, the 2-paragraph tantalizing description that ends with a dot, dot, dot. And they say, how lovely, we can't wait to read it. And then the next thing they get is the finished version. But the reason I ask this question is, and I don't know whether you know this, but I have been quite surprised really to learn how prevalent and prominent this is in the writing world. So many writers of fiction say to their agents, so I'm thinking of writing a book next in which this, and this happens, and it's going to be like this, and this. And their agent will go, no, no, don't write that. People aren't wanting that at the moment. So there's loads of writers who kind of negotiate with their agents and feel they have to get their agents' approval before starting a book. And I don't like, that's never been part of my writing life. And I guess that it wouldn't have been part of yours either.
No, I didn't even know that was a thing. I think with my second book, with the likeness, there were possibly my agent and possibly an editor as well going, can you give us some idea what's going on here? Which I think makes sense. They wanted to know, is this another Rob Ryan book? Is this a Link book? Have you decided to write historical fiction? What are we getting here? This is a 2-book deal. I'd like some idea what I'm getting. So then it kind of made sense. But now I think both for, like, you've written a lot more books than I have, but for both of us, I think it's relatively clear what kind of thing is going to be coming out. I mean, if one of us ends up writing a Regency romance, we would probably give people the heads up beforehand. But otherwise, they kind of know roughly what they're getting, and that we know to let them know if it's going to be something completely off-piece.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Out of all your books, which characters were the most fun or the most difficult to write? Somebody has asked.
Oh, I love this question. I could talk about characters all day. Okay, Frank Mackey, who shows up in The Likeness and Faithful Place and also in Secret Place, he's so much fun to write. He is, I think, partly because he's not at all like me. Like, Frank cares basically about his kid and his neighborhood and his city and his job and nothing else. He doesn't have that much of a moral compass. He has his priorities very clear, and from there, he's just going to do whatever is best for those things. And for somebody who does try really, really hard to do things right and to do right by other people, and most of us spend a certain amount of time on working out the best way to go about things from a moral perspective. It's a lot of fun to write somebody who really does not give a single damn. And I also like writing Mart, who's in both The Searcher and The Hunter, just because the way he goes around things, it's very Irish, the way he never goes at anything straight. He's all circumlocution and just mentioning things more and more delicately from different angles, maybe getting a little closer until the person he's trying to communicate with gets it. There's a lot of dark humor in there. There's a lot of slipperiness. There's a lot of wrong-footing people. And that's huge fun to write because it's a style of communication that's a lot of fun to play with. My least favorite character is easy. I had a really hard time writing Scorcher Kennedy as a narrator for Broken Harbour. Because, but this is a guy who he's shown up already in Faithful Place, where he's basically this pompous, rule-bound, everything in triplicate git. And then I realized that because Broken Harbour is a book about people who play by the rules and what happens when the rules kick them in the teeth, he had to be the narrator. This was obviously his book and a book for him. And people like that are not my people. I am not one of them. I don't like them. I don't particularly understand them. People who, everybody must follow the rules at all times and be wearing the correct, uniform while they do it. I don't get them. And you don't have that option if you're writing a narrator, especially in the first person. You don't have the option of going, this isn't my kind of person, I don't get it. He has to be justified, right, emotionally three-dimensional and layered and with a real depth to the reasoning behind why he does things. So I had to do that. I had to engage with the kind of person who I normally kind of avoid engaging with, to the point where I believed and could justify his entire outlook on life and consider it just as valid and important as any other. It's probably very good for you, writing, because it makes you empathize with people who normally you wouldn't put that level of emotional energy into. It's probably very good for you as a human being.
Yeah, and I have to say, I love all of your books, but Broken Harbour is my favorite.
Seriously?
And I loved him as a narrator, and I am really not a rule following person. But I loved him. And I loved that book. Yeah. Okay, so someone has asked a moral philosophy question, which is quite intriguing. Do you think some people are bad, or do people just do bad things? Are there some people who are innately bad or evil?
Okay, that's a really interesting one. I think the honest answer is that I am probably not qualified to give any kind of answer on that because you would have to do years of study on every level of psychology. And I do think there are some people who, I think we are all people who do bad things occasionally, like no way around that. And I don't think any of us can claim that we don't, but I do think there are some people who are devoid of the qualities of empathy and kindness that go to make somebody a good person. And that's as close as I think you can get. Or there are some people who enjoy hurting others, which is probably as close as you can get to saying somebody is evil, is if that's what they are drawn to for pure enjoyment. And they do it because they don't consider others to be real human beings. I think basic goodness is probably predicated on the idea that other people are human beings and matter. And if you take that away, I think it's hard to call yourself a good person. But then, of course, you're into the whole idea of does it have to be a choice in order to be evil? So if somebody is just constructed that way, can you consider it actual evil if they never made the choice to be like that? So yeah, no, you'd have to have all kinds of serious qualifications that I don't have to say anything authoritative. So that's what I think, but it may be complete rubbish.
What about the books that you love and have inspired you? Are there any books that have particularly inspired you that made you want to be a writer, or that you think of as your sort of most beloved books?
Okay, once I start, you're going to have to make me stop because I could keep going for a really long time. The one that I always blamed for this whole thing is The Wind in the Willows, which my dad read to me when I was like 6. And I can still remember hearing him say the sentence, which of course I'm going to misquote, but never in his life had he seen a river before, that sleek, sinuous, full-bodied animal. And I had never heard language used like that before, in that almost impressionistic kind of way, where it has an aural effect on you as well as a literal one. And I went, whoa, look what words can do. That had never occurred to me before. And I think there's probably a direct line from that moment to this one. And on another level, there are books like Donna Tartt's The Secret History and Josephine Tey's The Franchise Affair and The Daughter of Time, books like that where they are mysteries, but they're also wonderfully written books, and they also explode all the conventions and the rules of the mystery genre, and they say a genre can be much more than just its boundaries. And that was hugely formative for me when I started to get into this. Writers like that who are going, it can be much more than a set of rules. And Dennis Lehane as well, with books like Mystic River, where he's going, it doesn't just have to be a gripping plot. It can also be wonderful character studies, beautiful writing, a whole social history of a neighborhood. And, writers like that, I will shut up now, so that's enough, but writers like that who try to do it all in their books.
Yeah, yeah. If you could travel, this is one that someone has sent in. If you could travel to any time and place in Ireland's history, and I think he says, and stay there for a year. Hold on, let me just spend a year. Sorry, it's a she, not a he. If you could travel to any time and place in Ireland's history and spend a year there, when and where would it be and why?
I have always really liked sort of 15th, 16th, 17th century history. I don't know why, but that is the era that I am most interested in. I suppose it may be the kind of cultural explosion that was happening in so many places at the time. Now, Ireland was, slightly different position because of being colonized and being in a state of sort of cultural and political and religious tension all over. But that's when I'd go for somewhere in there. I don't know. I think I'm going to go for around sort of maybe late 1590s. And while I'm having that year there, I'm hopping over to London and seeing a Shakespeare show.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Do you think, there's another one someone sent in, do you think you will ever, or are you tempted to write a book that is not set in Ireland, that's set somewhere else?
I kind of love to, but because I put a lot of emphasis on setting, like I think a book is connected to its setting in ways that it can't just be transposed. You can't just set a book somewhere else. It wouldn't be the same book. The characters wouldn't be the same people. The events wouldn't unfold in the same way. And I'm not sure there is anywhere I know well enough to set a book there, apart from Ireland. So I'd have to go somewhere and spend some time there before I felt that I knew the location and the people and just even the pace of day-to-day life and the way things operate well enough to set a book there with a proper flavor, the proper seasonings. I don't think I know anywhere else well enough at the moment.
Well, that leads very neatly to the next question sent in by a different person, which is, if you could have a writing spot where you sat and wrote anywhere in the world, where would it be?
I'm sticking with home. I'm very happy with my writing spot, which is a smallish room in our house, and it is perfect, and it is relatively quiet, touch woods, as long as everybody is out at school, and it's near to coffee. And there's something very lovely in knowing that it's in your own home, and that this is not only the place where you live, it's also the place where you get to make stuff. I love the fact of working from home. There's something very special about that for me. So I'm staying home.
And do you always, like with all of your books, are they all written at home in that room? Or have there ever been times when you were staying, so you wrote a bit of a book somewhere else, or you wrote in a cafe for a while, or is it always your writing room at home?
Not always. I mean, sometimes there have been bits where, like, I'm off on holiday somewhere, or I'm on a bus to God knows where, and I go, "Oh man, okay, that paragraph would work really well," and I borrow a piece of paper off somebody and scribble something down and try not to lose it before I get home and can stick it back in my notebook. But mostly it's there. Yeah, and before that, before we had an actual home there, it was the starving artist garret, the
Yeah.
granny flat. For yeah.
Someone's asked about your sort of daily writing process. So do you write every day or weekdays only? And do you have a set number of words you aim to do a day, or a set sort of hour, like you do these hours every day, or does it just vary?
It's completely dictated by school hours. I used to write, my natural writing schedule is to like stay up until about 2:30 in the morning writing, and then not get up until around 10. And I'm a night owl by nature, but that doesn't really work once you've got kids, because there is the school run. The school run's not, not going to wait for you to get up from your late night writing. So now it's school hours. It's everybody's out, I'm writing, then everybody comes in, and I do the other side of life, which works really, really well, because I think in so many ways people always go, well, how do you balance writing and having a family? And I'm going, I'm so much luckier. It's much easier than for many people, because I don't have to ring in and switch shifts with anybody. If somebody suddenly, one of the kids wakes up throwing up, I don't have to like take a paid time off day. I don't have to find a babysitter. I can just take that day off and then make sure I work double hard another one, or get a day at the weekend to make up for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody wants to know if you've had any negative personal experience of either rugby players or rugby fans, because he says several of your books feature rugby players or fans as a shorthand for someone who is at best a jerk and at worst Dominic Ganley. I've always wondered based on some kind of personal experience.
No, I swear I actually like rugby, and I think I think I like most rugby players. In fact, I don't know any serious rugby players, but I have nothing against them. I think that's maybe a cultural shortcut that I may have fallen into a little bit more than I should, because I don't know if this transfers across cultures, but over here anyway, the connotation is that soccer and soccer fans tend to be more working class, and rugby fans tend to be much more middle class, and there tends to be a slight elitist tinge to it. Like one of our greatest rugby players, Brian O'Driscoll, apparently got like a load of teasing in school for not being from the fanciest possible neighborhood. There is just that slight elitist overtone that can come with it at certain levels. So I think that may have seeped in possibly more than I intended it to. But no, I like rugby.
Um, Another question from one of our audience. Several of your books feature children and teenagers witnessing or reckoning with murder, or adults still processing a kind of crime-related childhood trauma. What draws you to that subject, and is writing teenagers more challenging than writing adults?
You are absolutely right. And I've noticed that myself, that a kind of disproportionate number, in particular of the victims, are sort of somewhere between puberty and late teens in my books. I think it's because I like writing about people at liminal stages in life, at turning points, because while these are in many ways some of the most fascinating stages in life, both to experience and to see, like psychologically, these are the most intricate and explosive and just shooting off fascinating things like fireworks, moments of learning. They're also quite dangerous, these liminal points of transition. They're moments when we are extremely vulnerable, when we're, between childhood and teenagerhood, or between teenagerhood and adulthood. It's a very vulnerable and very strange time when so much is happening. And I think that's why, it's because of that focus in on these transition points. But I like writing teenagers. I think
Yeah.
teenagers are great. They are smart and they have enough energy to power entire cities, and they're creative, and they're a lot of fun to write. And Trey in particular, I really enjoyed writing because she is, in The Hunter, very much at a transition point. Like, she starts the book as somebody who's seeing things in a childhood way of black and white, and there's one thing she wants, and it's revenge, and all her focus goes into that. When you're a little kid and it's just, if you want something, you want it with your whole mind and body. There's no room for shades of gray or for nuance or for, oh, well, but on the other hand, kind of opposing forces. But by the end of the book, she's gone through that leap into teenagerhood where she starts to realize that things are not that simple, and that sometimes there are unintended consequences and you have to see more than one step ahead. And her brain started working on a whole different level, and her relationship with Cal has been redefined, her relationship with Lena. And I really enjoyed writing that transition point, because these are the most interesting characters, and the most interesting moments in our lives are people who are moving forward. So hence loads of teenagers.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, we've got time for just one more question, which is another one that was sent in by one of our viewers. What advice would you give, if you could give one piece of advice to either young or brand new or emerging mystery writers? What advice would you give?
Okay, to all writers, not just mystery, all of your characters are real people, and they have to have their reasons for doing things and their own emotional take on the situation. Because I see too many books where the main character has like three-dimensional complex agendas and reasons for doing things, but so many of the other characters are clearly only there to show sides of the main character. There is absolutely no reason why they would be in this book at all. They would be off somewhere else doing something else. Every one of your characters has to have reasons for everything they do, and every one of your characters is right from their own perspective. Nobody is stupid, is evil, is misguided, is, just there because it's useful to the main character. Everybody has to be there for their own reasons.
Yeah, that's a great bit of advice. That is a great bit of advice. Well, thank you so much, Tana. That has been absolutely fascinating chatting with you for an hour. As you know, you are my favourite living crime writer, and Western writer as well. So it's been really good fun. Thank you so much to everyone who listened in. And if you have ordered copies of Tana's new book, they will be sent to you, and you should receive them within 8 to 10 days. They are on the way. Your copies will be in the mail very soon, and they will be landing on your doorsteps 8 to 10 days from now. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a lovely day.
Can I just take a second to say thank you so much to Sophie for doing this, and to Barnes and Noble for all their support and for having me. And thank you to all of you guys for taking time out of your day. And I hope the book repays your time. Thank you.